The quiet one in the corner doesn't belong here, and Dr. Sterling knows it the moment he sees her locker open, worn combat boots sitting on the shelf like a secret nobody's supposed to find. Katie Rodriguez. That's what the name tag says. But those boots tell a different story, and Sterling has spent 32 years reading the small tells that separate the competent from the frauds. Something about her doesn't fit. The way her hands move. The way she never flinches at things that make nurses cry. 3 weeks on this unit and she hasn't asked for a single day off, hasn't complained once, and hasn't made a single mistake he can use against her. Not yet. But Sterling is patient. He's built his entire career on patience, patience to understand power structures, patience to identify threats, patience to eliminate them quietly. And Katie Rodriguez, with her careful movements and her worn boots and whatever secrets those boots represent, is starting to look like the kind of threat that requires immediate attention. He didn't know she would save a life in the next 24 hours. He didn't know that saving that life would nearly destroy her. What he absolutely knew was this: she was standing in his hospital, on his unit, breathing his air, and she was going to have to go. Katie arrives at Mercy General at 5:51 a.m. on a Wednesday in November, and the fluorescent lights buzz their familiar mechanical hum as she pushes through the employee entrance. The Denver morning is still dark outside the windows, that particular kind of dark that comes just before winter settles in for real. Her sneakers are silent on the tile floor. That's by design. 23 years of moving through spaces without announcing herself. 23 years of being the person in the room nobody remembers. The locker room is empty this early, just the hum of the overhead lights and the smell of old coffee from yesterday's pot. She opens her locker, the one in the back corner, away from the mirrors, and pulls out the scrubs she'll wear for the next 12 hours. Navy blue. Standard issue. Nothing that marks her as different. But underneath, on the metal shelf, sit the boots. Worn tan leather, laces frayed at the edges, a faint dust-colored stain across the right toe that no amount of cleaning will remove. She doesn't touch them. She doesn't need to. They're there. That's enough. The doors to the ICU open at 6:03 a.m. and Katie steps into a different world. Mercy General's intensive care unit is a cathedral of machines and monitors, the kind of place where the air smells like antiseptic and the faint copper undertone of blood someone's already scrubbing away. 17 beds. 13 occupied. The night shift is wrapping up, and Katie can see the exhaustion on their faces, that particular kind of exhaustion that comes from 8 straight hours of other people's emergencies. Her shift supervisor, Nurse Jackson, doesn't look up from the chart she's reading. Jackson never does. 3 weeks in and Katie has learned that eye contact here is interpreted as a challenge. So she doesn't make it. She clocks in at the main station, 6:04 a.m., and begins her morning ritual, checking the beds, reading the overnight notes, understanding the stories written in monitor patterns and medication drips. Bed 7 has a post-op cardiac patient still on the ventilator. Bed 11 is a septic elderly man from the nursing home, systolic blood pressure barely holding at 95. Bed 14, and Katie pauses here, something flickering across her face so quickly that nobody catches it. Bed 14 has a Navy captain named Marcus Webb. Routine surgical repair. In for 48 hours, out by Friday. The chart reads clean. Vitals stable. Pre-op labs perfect. But the moment Katie looks at him, really looks at him, her hands go still. His left forearm is exposed, tattooed across the outside of his wrist in military block lettering, Angel 6. That's not his call sign. That's hers. That's the name they screamed into the radio in Ramadi when they thought she was dead. That's the name that got erased from every database the moment the Pentagon decided she never existed. She doesn't react. She checks his full line. She confirms his pain level, reported at 2 out of 10. She marks the vitals on the monitor. And she doesn't let herself think about the extraction point, or the 3 miles through enemy fire, or the weight of his body when she carried him on her back because his legs wouldn't work anymore and the helicopter was still 10 minutes away. "You're the new nurse," a voice says. Not unkind. Not warm either. Just a statement of fact. Dr. Sterling stands at the foot of bed 8, hospital badge clipped to the pocket of his white coat, a coat that's expensive enough that Katie can see the tailor marks in the seams. He's maybe 60, maybe older. The kind of man whose authority comes not from what he's earned but from what he's accumulated: degrees, publications, connections, a reputation that's been polished smooth by decades of careful image management. His grey hair is cut perfectly. His watch is a Rolex. Everything about him says, "I belong here." Everything about Katie's worn scrubs and quiet movement says the opposite. "Senior Nurse Rodriguez," she says. The rank slips out of habit, a mistake she needs to stop making. Nobody here knows what that title means. Nobody here needs to know. "Well, Nurse Rodriguez, I'm rounding this morning and I'd like to move through this unit efficiently." Sterling doesn't look at her while speaking. He's scanning the monitors, pulling up the chart for bed 7. "I trust the night shift briefed you adequately." "Yes, Doctor." "Excellent. Then you understand that Captain Webb in bed 14 is post-op and on a standard pain management protocol. 3 milligrams morphine every 4 hours, titrated as needed. No complications expected. Simple observation." Katie has already read the chart. She knows the protocol. She also knows, because she can read monitor trends the way most people read grocery lists, that Captain Webb's cardiac output is trending down. Nothing catastrophic, nothing that would show up as an alarm yet, but the kind of subtle shift that precedes problems. It's there in the widening QRS complexes, in the slight elevation of his CVP pressure, in the way his oxygen consumption pattern shifted overnight. But she doesn't say any of this. She nods instead. "Understood, Doctor." Dr. Sterling moves on to the next bed. This is how it works in hospitals. There's a hierarchy as rigid as any military command structure, and Katie learned a long time ago that challenging the hierarchy means losing your place in it. The difference is that in the military, when you saw something wrong, you reported it up the chain and sometimes, if you were lucky, things changed. In a hospital, if you're nobody, and you see something wrong, you learn to stay quiet. But 6 hours later, at 12:22 p.m., Captain Webb's heart rate creeps up to 104. His blood pressure drops from 118/74 to 112/68. And when Katie looks at his chest, really looks at it, she sees something that shouldn't be there, the subtle rise and fall pattern that indicates pericardial effusion. The fluid is building around his heart. He's coding toward tamponade, and the monitor won't light up an alarm until he crashes completely. She has maybe 90 minutes before this becomes an emergency. She finds Dr. Sterling in the physician's lounge, which is when everything begins to change. "Doctor, I need to discuss Captain Webb's vitals." Sterling doesn't look up from his laptop. His vitals are stable. His cardiac output is declining. The post-op effusion markers are. "Nurse Rodriguez." Sterling's voice doesn't raise. It just hardens. "I think I can manage my own patients. I have 37 years of experience in this unit. You have 3 weeks. So unless you're reporting an actively coding patient, I suggest you stick to what you were hired to do and let me do what I was trained to do." Katie absorbs this like she absorbs everything, without a flicker of visible reaction. One breath in. One breath out. And she says, in a voice so calm it sounds like she's commenting on the weather, "I've been yelled at by better men in worse places, Doctor." The room goes perfectly still. Sterling stares at her, and for just a moment, something sharp flickers across his face, not anger, but something colder. Recognition that this quiet nurse just said something that implied she had a past he didn't understand. Then he turns back to his laptop, and the moment passes, leaving only his voice behind, cold as January rain. "See that it doesn't happen again." Katie turns and walks back toward bed 14, where the monitors are still climbing, where the Navy captain lies unaware that the quiet woman checking his for is the same operator who carried him 3 miles through a war zone while his blood soaked into her body armor. The machines keep their rhythm. The fluorescent lights hum their mechanical hymn. And somewhere in the building, a storm warning is being issued on the weather radio that nobody's paying attention to yet. But that's not here. That's not now. Now there's just Captain Webb and a timeline that's running out and a Dr. Sterling who just learned that the quiet one in the corner might bite back. The afternoon shift arrives at 2:33 p.m. with fresh coffee and fresh energy, and neither of those things will matter in the next 20 hours. The afternoon shift arrives at 2:27 p.m. with fresh coffee and fresh energy, and neither of those things will matter in the next 20 hours. Katie finishes her charting in the ICU, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the same precision that once zeroed in rifle sights. Captain Webb's monitors show steady rhythm. She checks the fall line, touches the saline bag to confirm flow rate, and moves to the next bed without looking back. The fluorescent lights hum their mechanical song above her head. Then Dr. Sterling rounds. He arrives with 3 residents trailing behind him like pilot fish, their white coats starched into submission. Sterling moves through the unit with the gait of a man who owns the building. His watch catches the light, something expensive, something that whispers about summer homes and inherited money. The residents scribble frantically on clipboards, capturing every word that falls from his mouth as if gospel. Katie continues working, adjusting a ventilator dial, checking a Foley catheter output. She does not look up. Sterling pauses at the bed of a 53-year-old post-op cardiac patient. The man's wife sits in the corner chair, fingers worrying the strap of her purse. Sterling reviews the chart with theatrical precision, turning pages with one hand while the other rests in his pocket. Katie notices something immediately. The patient's most recent antibiotic dose is written at 500 milligrams. For this patient's weight and renal function, it should be 250 milligrams. The dose will cause toxicity. The patient's next labs will show it in 6 hours. Organ damage will follow. Katie approaches the bed quietly. "Doctor, I need to clarify the dosage on the last antibiotic." Sterling does not look at her. He continues reading the chart. The patient's creatinine is elevated. At 500 milligrams, we're risking. "You're risking nothing," Sterling says. He turns to face her, and his expression carries the weight of a man about to teach a lesson. "Because you are a nurse. Not a physician. Not a pharmacist. A nurse. You take orders. You do not question them. You certainly do not approach me in front of patients and families with concerns that are frankly above your pay grade and your comprehension level." The wife's eyes widen. One of the residents stops writing. Katie takes a measured breath. The kind of breath she learned in a place where hesitation meant body bags. One tear escapes, just one, and she wipes it without breaking his gaze. When she speaks, her voice emerges flat, calibrated, carrying the weight of someone who has seen the absolute worst that human beings can inflict on each other. "I've been yelled at by better men in worse places, doctor." The words land like a round finding its mark. Sterling's face darkens. The wife looks away, uncomfortable. One of the residents actually winces. Sterling opens his mouth to respond, but Katie has already turned back to the monitor, her hands resuming their work with the mechanical precision of someone whose body knows how to function even when the mind is somewhere else entirely. A place where the sky bleeds orange and mortars sound like thunder. Sterling walks away. But he does not forget. 2 hours later, Katie enters the break room for the first time that shift. She is thirsty. There is a bottle of water in the refrigerator with her name on it. She reaches for the door handle and the entire room empties. Not gradually. Not politely. All at once. A resident with a half-eaten sandwich stands and leaves. 2 nurses who were discussing shift logistics gather their things and exit. Even Janet, who has worked nights for 17 years and has never been unkind to anyone, gathers her phone and follows the exodus. The fluorescent light hums in the sudden silence. Katie fills her water bottle and leaves without drinking. She does not need to ask what happened. She already knows. Sterling made a phone call. Or sent a message. Or simply looked at each person with an expression that communicated a very clear hierarchy, be on my side or be on hers. And no one wants to be on the side of someone who challenges the structure. The next morning, Katie arrives for her shift at 6:16 a.m. The board in the break room holds the usual notes about staffing, equipment failures, and bed assignments. But there is also a printed memo tacked to the cork surface. Her name is on it. The memo cites 3 separate policy violations. She allegedly failed to report a potential medication error through proper channels. Instead, she went directly to the physician in a manner that could be construed as insubordination. She allegedly neglected to complete required documentation on 2 separate occasions. She allegedly made unauthorized modifications to patient care protocols without attending the necessary training module. None of it is true. All of it is documented. Sterling has manufactured a paper trail that would take weeks to unravel. Katie reads it once. She removes the memo from the board. She places it in her pocket. At 10:13 a.m., Sterling catches her in the hallway outside the medication room. He is alone. His tone is conversational, almost friendly, which somehow makes it worse. "I'm concerned about your trajectory here, Katie. Mercy General has standards. We have protocols for a reason. When nurses ignore those protocols, when they overstep their scope, it creates liability. It creates danger." He leans against the wall with the posture of a man settling in for a conversation. "Your previous hospital, excellent reference, by the way, very thorough employment record, but I have to wonder if you left there under similar circumstances." Katie does not respond. The hallway smells like bleach and something else underneath it. Decay, maybe. Or just the ordinary rot of institutional power. "I'm going to recommend a 90-day probationary period," Sterling continues. "Additional supervision of all your patient interactions. And I'll need you to attend a retraining module on scope of practice. It's not personal. It's just policy." Katie meets his eyes. She does not blink. She does not defend herself. She does not cry or flinch or retreat. Instead, she simply turns and walks back to the medication room. Her hands are steady as she pulls the antibiotic from the cabinet. The correct dose. The one that will actually keep the patient alive. Behind her, Sterling stands in the hallway wondering why his words did not land the way he intended. Wondering why this one nurse, this one quiet, unremarkable nurse, did not bend under pressure the way everyone else does. His chest tightens with something he does not have a name for. Rage, maybe. Or fear. But that was not the worst part. At 11:38 p.m., the emergency department explodes into chaos. The radio crackles with the code, multiple trauma inbound. 14 minutes out. IED strike. Military convoy. Expect for T6 critical. The night shift suddenly shrinks to almost nothing. 2 physicians on duty. One of them is Sterling. The nurses scramble, moving supplies, opening trauma bays, preparing ventilators. The fluorescent lights seem to pulse with urgency. The ambulances arrive at 11:52 p.m. with sirens wailing so loud they seem to bend the air itself. 4 soldiers emerge on stretchers. 3 have penetrating trauma. 1 is seizing. The ED transforms into controlled panic. Sterling moves to the first patient, a young man with an IED wound to the left upper quadrant. He begins assessing, calling for blood, calling for imaging. Then the second patient codes. The monitor shows flat line. Not asystole. Tamponade. The patient's blood pressure is not registering because there is no pressure left. Something, shrapnel, bone fragment, tissue damage, has filled the space around his heart. Each beat pumps against a sealed chamber. The heart is suffocating in its own cavity. Sterling freezes. He is excellent at routine cardiac management. He is experienced in heart attacks and arrhythmias and the ordinary pathologies of peacetime. But this is different. This is trauma medicine. This is the sound a human makes when their body is being betrayed by physics. One of the nurses begins chest compressions. Sterling reaches for the crash cart. He knows intellectually what he should do, know the procedure, know the steps, know the equipment. But knowing and doing are different when the clock is running and the patient is dead and the family is already in the waiting room. Katie appears at the bedside. She does not ask permission. She does not announce herself. She simply moves into position with the fluid grace of someone whose muscle memory has been burned into her by thousands of repetitions across 2 continents and a decade of doing this when electricity was a luxury and medical equipment was whatever you could find. Pericardiocentesis, she says. We don't have the proper, Sterling starts. But Katie is already moving. She grabs a 18-gauge needle and a 30-milliliter syringe. She locates the landmarks, xiphoid process, chest wall, the angle that means the needle goes to the right place. She has done this in a Humvee under fire. She has done this by flashlight. She has done this while rounds came in from 3 directions and the sand was the color of blood. She does not do it any differently now. The needle slides in. The syringe fills with dark blood. The release of pressure is immediate. The monitor beeps. Rhythm returns. The patient's oxygen saturation climbs. 67, 72. 81, normal sinus rhythm at the top of the screen. Sterling stares at her hands. Get me a 12 lead, Katie says to the nearest nurse. Set up for the next one. She does not look at Sterling. She does not acknowledge the way his face has gone completely pale. She does not notice that he has stepped back, that he is now standing beside the supply cart, watching as the quiet nurse moves through the trauma bay like she has done this 1,000 times. Because she has. The intercom crackled at 2:13 a.m. Code blue, basement level. All available staff. The words came through static and rain, because by then the rain was coming down like punishment, like the sky had decided to open its accounts and foreclose on everything at once. Katie was pulling off her gloves when the first alert hit, not the alarm, but the sound of something else. The sound of water where water should not be. A low, grinding rumble from beneath the hospital's concrete bones. The basement floods in Denver were urban legend, the kind of thing old nurses mentioned once and never again. The kind of thing everyone assumed the infrastructure would prevent. The kind of thing that was, at this exact moment, preventing nothing. The basement level held 12 patients. Post-op recovery beds, 2 ventilator cases in the ICU wing down there, a renal patient waiting for morning dialysis. Skeletal staff. The night shift was always skeleton crew. And the power had gone out 3 minutes before the water breach. The backup generators were struggling, and there was no time to struggle gracefully when chest-deep water was rising through the sub-basement and climbing the emergency stairs like something alive and hungry. Katie moved toward the stairwell. Not running. Never running. Running means panic. Running means others panic. She descended the concrete stairs and felt the temperature drop with each step, felt the electric charge in the air that comes just before everything tips from manageable to catastrophic. The water was already at mid-thigh when she hit the landing. Cold. So cold it stopped the breath. The basement was a super fluorescent emergency lighting and dark water, and she could see shapes moving, nurses wading through, a resident trying to disconnect monitors from a post-op bed that was 3 hours from discharge. Then she saw him. The cardiac patient. 53-year-old male, post-cab, supposed to go home at noon. He was still connected to the monitor, and the monitor was shrieking the kind of shriek that stops time. Flat line. The water was at his chest. His wife stood beside him, frozen, and the nursing assistant was frozen, and the resident was frozen, and Katie felt something shift inside her chest, felt the weight of 18 years in Denver fall away like a coat, felt the muscle memory of Ramadi come back online like a generator switching to full load. Get him horizontal, Katie said. Not a question. A command. Her voice had dropped an octave. The wife blinked. Now. The resident moved. Thank God the resident moved. They got the patient down onto the waterlogged bed, and Katie was already moving toward the supply cart that floated like some bizarre nightmarish boat in the corner. A flashlight. Where was there? She grabbed it, clamped it between her teeth, the metal cold and sharp against her molars. The taste of metal and fear and something else, something like clarity, like the world narrowing down to exactly 5 things that mattered. Pericardiocentesis. The cardiac tamponade. The water had stopped meaning anything the moment the monitor flatlined. There was only the patient. There was only the heart that had stopped pumping. Her hands moved on their own. She found the chest tube kit, 18-gauge needle, sterile field, though there was nothing sterile about chest-deep floodwater and a Colorado River worth of sediment and whatever else was rising through the hospital's arteries. She prepped the site anyway, marked the 5th intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, her fingers finding the anatomical landmarks the way a blind woman reads Braille. "I need 100% oxygen," she said. The flashlight beam wavered as her jaw tightened. "And suction. Now." The wife was crying. The resident was pale. Katie did not see them. Katie saw only the needle, the air, the terrible silence in a chest that should have been beating. She positioned the needle at a 45-degree angle, felt the resistance of tissue, felt the moment it broke through, that subtle change in pressure like pushing through a membrane. The syringe was her guide. Negative pressure. Then the hiss of air escaping. That sound. That terrible, beautiful sound. The monitor registered a change. A bump. A single blip. 72, Katie said, reading the O2 saturation on the monitor through the flashlight beam held between her teeth. The numbers climbed. 75. 80. 82. Her fingers moved, withdrew fluid, blood-tinged, the sign of a punctured ventricle, the sign of everything falling apart, and the needle was still, was perfect, was doing exactly what it was meant to do. 88. 90. 92. Stable. The cardiac rhythm returned like someone had switched a light back on. The monitor sang. The wife made a sound like a prayer. Katie did not celebrate. She disconnected, covered the site with sterile gauze, a gesture towards sterility that meant nothing in this water but meant everything in her muscle memory, and straightened up. The water was at her ribs now. Rising. The backup power was dimming. They had maybe 10 minutes before the lower level would be completely submerged. "We move everyone." "Now," Katie said. Her voice did not sound like a nurse anymore. It sounded like someone who had made life-and-death decisions in desert heat, who had moved through smoke and kept moving, who had learned that speed and purpose kept people breathing. Triage protocol. Highest acuity first. The vent cases are priority 1. Post-op recovery goes priority 2. Dialysis patient is priority 3. Move. The resident was staring at her. The wife was staring at her. In the flashlight beam, Katie saw the moment something shifted in their faces, confusion, recognition, the small shock of seeing a person they thought they knew suddenly become someone else entirely. "You," the resident said. "You're not, how did you?" "Evacuation priority." "Focus," Katie said. The voice was ice over authority. "Move the cab patient up to ICU. Carefully. His pericardium is compromised." She was already moving toward the ventilator cases. The water climbed. The emergency lights flickered. She secured the first vent case, a hand on the shoulder of the nurse moving the patient, and gave orders with the precision of someone who had done this before, not in a hospital, but in places where the stakes were even simpler, move or die. She coordinated the evacuation up the stairwell, water sloshing, alarm screaming, emergency lights strobing through the darkness like warning flares. The post-op patients went next. The dialysis patient last. She did the head count herself. 12 down. 12 going up. Nobody left behind. It took 8 minutes. The water was at her shoulders when the last patient cleared the basement level. She climbed the stairwell last, because that is what leaders do, and something had happened in the last 8 minutes, something had changed in the muscle and bone of how she moved, how she thought, how she existed in the world. The quiet nurse was gone. What climbed those stairs was someone else entirely. At the landing, she turned back and looked at the dark water consuming the basement, consuming the beds, consuming the monitors. She had carried 3 wounded through a kill zone in Ramadi. She had held pressure on a femoral artery for 7 miles. This was nothing. This was Tuesday. This was what she was built for, even though the world did not know it, even though Denver thought she was just another nurse in scrubs and worn combat boots. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was knowing that Dr. Sterling was standing on the stairwell above her, watching everything, understanding nothing, and that he would spend the next 24 hours trying to bury this, trying to prove she had overstepped, trying to destroy her for the sin of being competent when he was not. The morning sunlight hit the hospital corridor like a weapon, and Dr. Sterling had already made 3 phone calls before Katie clocked in for the day shift. He sat in his office on the 4th floor, fingers moving with surgical precision across his keyboard, pulling up old hospital directories and contact lists that he had memorized over 20 years of institutional climbing. The board members, Hutchins, Valera, and Chen, owed him favors. Hutchins had gotten his son into med school through Sterling's letter of recommendation. Valera's daughter had interned under his mentorship. Chen's medical practice had been backed by Sterling's research endorsement when no one else would touch his controversial cardiac protocols. 1 phone call to each of them. That was all it would take. "Hutchins, I need your ear for a moment," Sterling said, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a man who had never once been told no by institutional authority. "We have a serious credentialing issue that's come to my attention. A nurse on my unit, Katie Rodriguez, appears to have falsified her documentation from her previous hospital. Mountain View Medical in Salt Lake." Yes. Yes, I realize how serious that is. I have someone looking into it now, but I wanted to make sure the board understood the liability exposure before this becomes public. The silence on the other end of the line was the sound of loyalty crystallizing into action. Valera took his call at 9:33 a.m. "The investigator I'm working with needs her previous employment verified," Sterling explained. "I'm concerned her references may be fraudulent. It's a delicate situation. We don't want to accuse without evidence, but we also can't afford to harbor someone practicing outside their scope." By 10:13 a.m., Chen had already begun making calls to contacts at the state nursing board, creating the appearance of a routine audit that was anything but routine. The investigators arrived by noon, 2 suits with clipboards and the bureaucratic authority that made even emergency room doctors nervous. They didn't announce themselves to Katie. They went directly to Human Resources, requesting her complete employment file, her nursing license documentation, her references from Mountain View Medical, her transcripts from her nursing program. They moved through the hospital like auditors, not hunters, but the effect was identical. They were building a case, and Sterling was orchestrating it from his office with the precision of a man who understood that institutions protect their own until one of them becomes a liability. Katie didn't know any of this yet. She was working a regular shift, running labs, checking vitals, moving through the rhythm of the unit with the same quiet competence that had become her armor. But by 1:38 p.m., whispers had started in the break room. Staff members mentioned that HR had called them individually, asking about Katie's work performance, whether they had ever seen her practice outside her scope, whether anything about her background seemed unusual. The investigators had been asking specific questions, questions that suggested they already knew something. Questions designed to confirm what Sterling had already alleged. By 2:51 p.m., Katie was called into a conference room on the 3rd floor. Sterling was there, along with 2 hospital administrators she had never seen before and one of the investigators in a navy suit that hung like a warning. The fluorescent lights above hummed their mechanical monotone, and Katie felt the weight of institutional machinery shifting into motion. This was how it worked. Not with justice or evidence, but with procedure and process and the slow strangulation of due process. Sterling smiled, actually smiled, as he pulled out a folder and began to read from it. "Ms. Rodriguez, we have some questions regarding your employment history and your credentials," one of the administrators began, her voice careful and lawyered. "Specifically, your previous employment at Mountain View Medical in Salt Lake City. We've been unable to verify your work record there. In fact, when our investigators contacted the hospital directly, they had no record of anyone by your name working in their nursing department at any point in the past 15 years. Katie's breath didn't change. Her hands remained folded on the table in front of her. Her eyes didn't move from the administrator's face. One measured breath in. One measured breath out. "We're also concerned about the timeline in your employment history," the investigator continued. "There appears to be a 15-month gap between your stated employment at Mountain View and your start date here at Mercy General. During that time, you have no documented work history. We're concerned this may indicate undisclosed criminal activity or other disqualifying events. We're recommending immediate suspension pending a full background investigation," Sterling said, and Katie heard the satisfaction underneath his clinical tone. "You are to surrender your badge and your hospital credentials immediately. You will not be permitted to access the unit, to contact patients, or to perform any clinical duties. If these investigations reveal what we suspect, the Colorado Nursing Board will be notified, and we will pursue criminal charges for practicing medicine without a license." Katie stood. She said nothing. She pulled off her hospital badge, the thing that had made her invisible, that had allowed her to hide in plain sight for 3 years, and set it on the table. The lanyard made a soft sound as it settled. She looked at Dr. Sterling for the first time since she had entered the room, and something in her eyes made him flinch, just slightly. Just enough. "I'm going on break," she said quietly, and walked out of the room. She cleared her locker in 8 minutes. Not rushed. Not frantic. Methodical. She pulled down her spare stethoscope, her reference books, the granola bars she kept in the back corner. And then she reached for the bottom of the locker where she had kept them for 3 years, the worn combat boots with the scuffed leather and the laces that had never quite come clean. She held them for a moment. They smelled like desert dust and engine grease and something else, something that belonged to a different life, a different woman, a different name that had been officially erased from every government database in existence. She packed them in her bag and walked out of Mercy General at 3:22 p.m. without looking back. The rain started 40 minutes later, heavy and cold and relentless. Katie stood at the edge of a cemetery in northwest Denver, the headstone in front of her black granite with gold lettering that caught the rain and threw it back at the sky. Michael Rodriguez. 1974 to 2019, beloved husband. The grass around the grave was overgrown. She hadn't been here in months. She couldn't afford to come here. Couldn't afford the memories. Couldn't afford to let anyone see her grieving because grief was a luxury that people with classified backgrounds couldn't indulge in. She sank to her knees on the wet grass. The rain soaked through her scrubs, cold against her skin, and for the first time in the hospital, her composure cracked. Not in front of witnesses. Not in front of Sterling. Here, where no one could see her except the dead, she let the tears come. "I promised you," she whispered, her voice breaking like something that had been held together for too long. "I promised you I'd stay hidden. That I'd live the quiet life you wanted for me. That I'd be just a nurse, that I'd come home and cook dinner and be normal and be safe and be invisible. I promised you that part of my life was over. And I kept that promise for 3 years. I did everything right. I didn't reach out to anyone from before. I didn't answer calls from people who knew my real name. I became someone new. I became someone small and quiet and unremarkable, and you would have been proud of that. You always said the best operators were the ones nobody noticed." Her voice dropped so low it was almost inaudible beneath the sound of rain hammering against the headstone. "But I couldn't let them die. When that patient was coding and Sterling wouldn't listen and everyone else froze, I couldn't let them die. And now I've lost everything anyway. The job is gone. The identity is blown. The cover is compromised. And I'm standing here telling you that I failed the one promise that mattered." She sat in the rain for 17 minutes, not moving. The combat boots sat beside her, soaked through, the leather darkening with water. She picked them up once, held them over the trash bin at the edge of the cemetery, her hand shaking not from fear but from the exhaustion of pretending to be someone she wasn't. All she had to do was let go. All she had to do was throw them away and disappear into another identity, another hospital, another city where no one knew her name. The Navy would help. The Navy always helped. They would create new documentation, new credentials, a new backstory that was clean and tight and airtight. She stood there with her hands open above the garbage, rain streaming down her face, and then she heard something that made her stop. In the distance, carried on the wind from the north, was a sound that belonged to a different lifetime. The low thrum of rotor blades cutting through air. Not close enough to see. Not close enough to identify. But close enough to recognize. The sound moved toward Denver, toward Mercy General, toward the place she had just walked away from. The sound of military helicopters, still several miles out but approaching with the inevitability of gravity. Katie closed her hand around the combat boots and pulled them against her chest. She looked at the headstone one more time, and the rain ran down her face like it had its own plan, like it knew something she didn't, like the universe was moving her toward something whether she was ready or not. At Mercy General Hospital, 2 floors below where she had cleared her locker, Captain Marcus Webb was waking up in his ICU bed. His cardiac monitor showed clean rhythm, steady and strong and alive because of a nurse he had never seen clearly enough to recognize. He reached for the call button, and when the charge nurse came, he asked a question that would change everything. "Where is she?" he said. "The nurse who saved me. The one they said performed the emergency procedure. I need to thank her. I need to know her name." The charge nurse hesitated. "She's not on shift today, Captain. And I'm not sure that's something I can discuss." But Captain Marcus Webb had led men through Ramadi. He had made it through 3 tours. And he had a name tattooed on his forearm in black ink, the call sign of someone he owed his life to, someone he had carried through enemy fire and never gotten the chance to repay. He had a feeling those 2 things were connected, and he was about to make sure someone important knew it. In his office on the 4th floor, Dr. Sterling was working on his computer, his fingers moving across the keyboard with the careful precision of someone who understood that institutions required proof. He was altering the timestamps in Katie's personnel file, changing the date she submitted her nursing license from 3 years ago to 6 months ago, making it appear that she had backdated her documentation, making it look like criminal fraud. He was creating a digital trail that would prove she had lied on her application, practiced without valid credentials, endangered patients through incompetence and deception. He was very careful with his work. He was very certain no one was watching. He didn't see the federal audit marker that had been placed on his terminal 3 hours earlier. He didn't know that outside investigators, the real ones, not the ones he had hired, had been tracing his digital footprint since Katie's medical procedure had triggered an automatic credentialing review. He didn't understand that the moment he started forging federal documents with timestamps and falsified records, he had crossed from institutional maneuvering into criminal territory, and that there were people whose job it was to notice exactly this kind of thing. Dr. Sterling saved his file at 4:06 p.m., deleted the evidence of his edits from the trash folder, and turned off his computer feeling like a man who had just won. He had no idea that federal auditors were already printing out screenshots of every keystroke he had made. He had no idea that his career was ending in real time, one fraudulent timestamp at a time. And somewhere in the rain above Denver, rotor blades cut through the afternoon sky, moving toward a hospital where a quiet nurse had just walked away from everything, carrying a pair of worn combat boots that were about to become the most important evidence in a story that was far from over. The front entrance erupted. 2 black SUVs and a Navy staff car pulled up to Mercy General's main doors at 2:41 p.m., and the sound of boots on tile echoed through the lobby like thunder rolling through a narrow canyon. The officer who stepped out first didn't walk, he commanded the space around him just by existing in it. His uniform hung on him like authority-made fabric. He strode past the reception desk without breaking stride, his jaw moving like he was chewing through his next words before they left his mouth. Senior Chief Rodriguez. Not a question. A summons. I need her. Now. The lobby fell silent. Visitors stopped mid-conversation. A volunteer at the information desk looked up from her computer, confused. No one named Rodriguez worked in an obvious position. No one at Mercy General went by a military rank. That's when Captain Marcus Webb appeared. He moved through the sliding doors behind the officer, still wearing the hospital bracelet on his wrist, still moving like a man made of precision and muscle. His right sleeve was rolled up past his elbow, and there on his forearm, dark and permanent against his skin, was a call sign. Phoenix 5. Underneath it, a date. 2009, Ramadi. He stepped forward and his voice carried across the entire lobby. Every head turned. Every ear locked onto the words that followed. Senior Chief Petty Officer Katie Rodriguez, United States Navy. The nurse administrator froze mid-keystroke. A family waiting in the lobby chairs exchanged confused glances. One of the residents standing near the elevator nearly dropped her tablet. Katie was still in the medication room on the 4th floor, reaching for a vial of heparin that she would never administer because she wasn't supposed to be here anymore. She'd been fired that morning. Suspended for willful insubordination, fraudulent credentials, the paperwork Dr. Sterling had prepared was meticulous. Flawless. Lethal. She was supposed to be gone by noon. Instead she'd stay to brief the night shift on her patient statuses, because that's what a senior chief does. Patients first. Always patients first. The intercom crackled. Katie Rodriguez to the main lobby. Katie Rodriguez to the main lobby. She didn't run. Senior chiefs didn't run. They moved with purpose. She set down the medication, logged out of the computer system, and walked toward the stairwell. Her shoes made soft sounds against the tile, a rhythm like a heartbeat. Steady. Controlled. The way you move when you're about to walk into a room where everything changes. When she reached the lobby, the officer turned to face her. His eye swept over her once, scrubs, sneakers, the hospital ID badge clipped to her chest pocket. Then he saluted. Not casually. Full military bearing. Fist to chest, then extended, crisp as a razor edge. Senior Chief. Welcome home. Behind him, a SEAL team leader stepped forward. Master Chief Garrett Hayes. She recognized him from 2009. From Ramadi. From the operation that was supposed to be buried so deep in classified archives that it would never surface, never be acknowledged, never exist. He was older now. Gray threading through his beard. But his eyes were the same, eyes that had watched her drag wounded Marines across a burning street while rounds snapped past their heads like angry wasps. Senior Chief Rodriguez held a position in East Ramadi for 11 hours, Hayes said. His voice was steady, official. The tone of a man reading medals into the record. Against a numerically superior force. 3 separate assault waves. She carried 6 wounded personnel through a kill zone. 3 of them would have died without her intervention. The nurse administrator's hands were shaking now. She had a file open in her hands, the file that Sterling had altered. Her eyes moved across the pages, and her voice cracked on the next words. Bronze Star. Hayes continued. 2nd Bronze Star. 3rd Bronze Star. Each medal landed like a hammer blow. The lobby was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights humming their electric hum. 2 Purple Hearts. Hayes paused. His eyes found Katie's for a moment. Combat wounds. Both survived. Both healed. Dr. Sterling was nowhere to be seen. He was in his office on the 3rd floor, the door locked, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip his mouse. The timestamps he'd altered were still on his screen. The records he'd falsified. The performance reviews he'd backdated. All of it designed to make it look like Katie had forged her own nursing credentials. All of it designed to end her? All of it about to end him instead. The FBI agent arrived 43 minutes later. She didn't announce herself. She simply appeared beside Sterling's office door with her badge already in her hand, her shoes making that particular clicking sound that federal agent shoes always make. Behind her was another agent. And behind them both was a uniform. Dr. James Sterling. He tried to speak. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. You're under arrest for forging federal documents, falsifying medical records, and obstruction of federal investigation. The badge flashed. Silver. Official. Real. You have the right to remain silent. They cuffed him in the hallway. The sound of the handcuffs clicking around his wrists echoed down the corridor like a period at the end of a sentence. Nurses stopped and stared. A resident looked away. No one made eye contact. No one spoke. The silence was so thick it had texture. They walked him past the break room. Then past the medication station. Then past the nurse's station where Katie stood with Captain Webb beside her, both of them still wearing their scrubs, both of them watching him pass with expressions that held no judgment, no anger, no satisfaction. Just acknowledgement. The simple recognition that the reckoning had arrived. Sterling's face had gone the color of old tile. His lips moved but produced nothing. The officer reading him his rights continued speaking as if Sterling were already invisible, which, in every way that mattered, he was. Katie stood in the main lobby an hour later, still wearing her scrubs. Still standing in the same spot where everything had inverted. In her hands were the combat boots. She'd retrieved them from her locker after the FBI had sealed Sterling's office and taken his computer. The boots were worn. The leather was creased. The laces were frayed. They'd been with her through 17 combat deployments and 3 separate identity erasures. They'd been the only constant in a life spent being someone else. Captain Webb stood across from her, and he was smiling. Not the smile of a man relieved or amused. The smile of a man who'd finally gotten to do something he'd wanted to do for 14 years. He saluted her. Full military bearing. Hand extended. I finally get to thank you with your real name, Senior Chief. For the first time in 14 years, Katie Rodriguez didn't have to hide. The erasure order was gone. The classified file was now declassified. The operation in Ramadi was in the official record. 3 bronze stars. 2 purple hearts. 1 senior chief petty officer who'd chosen to be just a nurse because a quiet life and a hospital job were the only way she knew to keep breathing after everything she'd seen. She returned the salute. The hospital board called her into a conference room 3 days later. They offered her the director of trauma position. A corner office. A 6-figure salary. Administrative authority over the entire emergency medicine department. She listened to every word. Then she stood up, set the offer letter on the table, and walked out. They found her on the 4th floor, checking vitals on the cardiac ICU patients. Still in scrubs. Still moving between rooms with the same quiet precision. Still saving lives one patient at a time. 6 months later, Dr. Sterling was spotted in Tucson working at a strip mall urgent care clinic, mopping floors between patients. The name tag read Steve. He flinched every time someone called him doctor. No one did, anymore. Mercy General added a veterans trauma wing. Free care for anyone in uniform. Professional staff, most of them with combat experience. The hospital's reputation transformed overnight. The best trauma center in the state. And Katie stayed. Not for the recognition. Not for the gratitude. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint, the restraint of a person who'd been ordered to disappear and chose instead to be seen. To be known. To be present. She wore her scrubs and her call sign didn't appear on any badge, but Captain Webb knew. Master Chief Hayes knew. And every patient who walked through those emergency room doors and got a second chance at life knew, even if they never understood why this particular nurse's hands moved like they'd been trained in ways that saved lives beyond what any textbook could teach. The quietest person in the room was the most dangerous. And now, finally, everyone could see it. If you're enjoying this, please hit like and subscribe, it really helps the channel. And leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from.